Breaking news tonight from Cape Canaveral, Florida. NASA was forced to postpone the historic launch of Boeing's Starliner capsule. It was set to take off tonight for the International Space Station with 2 astronauts on board. Here's CBS's Mark Strassman.
2 hours before launch, the rocket company pulled the plug. For NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, enthusiasm delayed but not dampened.
It's shocking to me that here we are, but here we are.
Every now and then it's like, wow, this is cool.
But something will be riding with Starliner's 2 astronauts. It'll be Boeing's reputation. Starliner's been stung by setbacks, severe software problems, jammed valves, parachute issues, nearly a mile of potentially flammable tape inside the capsule. In all, 7 years of delays, more than $1 billion in cost overruns.
I have full confidence that people are putting the vehicle together properly.
Mark Nappy is Boeing's program manager for Starliner.
This isn't a race. This is all about doing it right and doing it safely.
How important is it to the Boeing brand that this flight go well?
It's important to the crew, and it's important for our company.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew.
NASA already has one reliable space taxi, SpaceX. But the space agency wants redundancy, a space Uber and a space Lyft. So far, SpaceX has put 50 people into orbit. Boeing, none.
Despite all the setbacks, full confidence in Starliner, full confidence in Boeing?
Yes, at this time, absolutely.
Yeah, full confidence on the NASA side and the Boeing side. Yes, there's been some issues in the past. That's the past. That is not now.
Depending on the severity of the mechanical issue, they could try to launch again as soon as Tuesday. If not then, the next window opens on Friday. Nora?
Mark Strassman, thank you.
But we're going to begin with a new setback for the American aviation giant Boeing. Today, the launch of its Starliner spacecraft with astronauts on board was called off less than 4 minutes before liftoff. They're going to try again on Wednesday. CBS's Manuel Bojorquez is at the Kennedy Space Center. Manny, what happened?
Nancy, good evening. And that latest setback happened with just 3 minutes and 50 seconds to go before launch, when a computer system that is linked to the rocket and is supposed to take over in those final minutes issued an automatic hold. Boeing, NASA, and the maker of the rocket, ULA, are working to find out exactly why that computer system did not fully activate at the right time. The 2 astronauts aboard the Starliner, Commander Butch Wilmore and pilot Suni Williams, exited the capsule about an hour after the scrub. Boeing was hoping today's launch would have transported them to the International Space Station, making it the second private company able to do that after SpaceX. But Starliner has faced years of setbacks, an attempted launch last month that was called off due to technical issues, and now today's scrub. Both astronauts have said they are willing to wait until all systems are a go for a launch, but they have been in quarantine now for more than a month preparing for this launch. And Nancy, now yet another delay.
Well, hopefully they'll have better luck on Wednesday. Manuel Bojorquez, thanks so much.
Now to a historic liftoff. 2 NASA astronauts are right now on their way to the International Space Station, riding in a brand new spacecraft made by Boeing. CBS's Mark Strassman explains why today is so significant.
Here at the Kennedy Space Center, Nora, Starliner's launch meant the world to Boeing, a space shot at redemption.
And liftoff of Starliner and Atlas V.
Picture perfect. A new generation spacecraft heads to the space station carrying NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams after years of delays and more than $1 billion in cost overruns.
It's a little bit of controlled emotion because there's a lot of phases of this mission, and we just completed the first one.
Like its test flight to the International Space Station, Starliner's mission has a long way to go.
NASA has pushed back the return of Boeing's first crewed mission to the International Space Station again. The Starliner's mission was planned to last 9 days, but as Mark Strassman reports, NASA now says the crew won't be back before July.
Ignition and liftoff of Starliner and Atlas V.
Starliner's launch 2 weeks ago was picture perfect, but just hours into the test flight, a problem.
Looks like we picked up a couple more helium leaks.
All right, we're ready to copy and find out exactly what you mean by picked up another helium leak.
The Boeing-built spacecraft had launched with one small helium leak. Now it has 5. Starliner also lost 5 small maneuvering engines on its final approach to the space station. All but 1 were recovered, but the glitches convinced NASA to delay Starliner's return to Earth.
We want to give our teams a little bit more time to look at the data, do some analysis, and make sure we're really ready to come home.
CBS News space analyst Bill Harwood.
They're cleared to come home in an emergency. If they really need to leave right now, they could. It's not like they're stranded on the space station, but NASA just wants to get as much information as they can before the crew comes home.
Yeah, this is a risk, and it's a higher risk than most flights. It is a first flight, right, of the spacecraft with the crew on it.
We met Starliner's crew, astronauts Butch, Wilmore and Suni Williams, in Houston before their launch.
There might be a couple things that we'll be surprised by, but I think we are ready to handle any types of surprises that we get.
So far, all these surprises have been in Starliner's service module, but it gets thrown away before the capsule re-enters Earth's atmosphere, meaning engineers need to examine the faulty hardware while in space.
That's why they're making this big effort to get as much data as they can, because that's what they're going to have to base their decisions on downstream.
Boeing hoped this test flight would lead to regular astronaut flights to the ISS for NASA starting early next year. That's now in jeopardy. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Tonight, there are mounting problems at the International Space Station, with today's scheduled spacewalk called off at the last minute due to a water leak in one of the astronauts' spacesuits. All this as NASA has again postponed the return of Boeing's Starliner's first crewed mission to the ISS. CBS's Mark Strassman reports.
Ignition and liftoff.
Just hours after Starliner's June 5th launch came the first sign of trouble.
Starliner, looks like we picked up a couple more helium leaks.
All right, we're ready to copy and find out exactly what you mean by picked up another helium leak.
The Boeing-built spacecraft had launched with 1 small helium leak. Now it has 5. Starliner also lost 5 small maneuvering engines on its final approach to the space station. All but 1 were recovered, but the glitches convinced NASA to delay Starliner's return to Earth.
We want to give our teams a little bit more time to look at the data, do some analysis, and make sure we're really ready to come home.
CBS News space analyst Bill Harwood.
It's not like they're stranded on the space station, but NASA just wants to get as much information as they can before the crew comes home.
So far, all these problems have been in Starliner's service module, but it gets thrown away before the capsule re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, meaning engineers need to examine the faulty hardware while in space.
That's why they're making this big effort to get as much data as they can, because that's what they're going to have to base their decisions on downstream.
Starliner could stay in space at least a few more weeks before it would have to return to Earth. And until it does, astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams will be extra hands to help out on the space station. Nora?
We'll be watching. Mark Strassman, thank you very much.
NASA said today that 2 American astronauts are not stranded at the International Space Station, but they will have to stay there perhaps several weeks longer than planned. Engineers are troubleshooting Boeing's Starliner capsule. The veteran test pilots were scheduled to return to Earth more than 2 weeks ago, but problems with the capsule's propulsion system have delayed the flight home several times.
NASA says there's internal disagreement over how to bring home 2 astronauts from the International Space Station. The question, is Boeing's Starliner spacecraft up to the job? As CBS's Mark Strassman reports, NASA may have to use Boeing's competitor SpaceX to bring the astronauts home next February.
Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams were supposed to spend 8 days in space. NASA now says they could spend 8 months.
Our chances of an uncrewed Starliner return have increased a little bit based on where things have gone over the last week or 2.
Starliner has 2 unresolved issues: helium leaks and worries about small maneuvering engines that failed on the flight to the International Space Station. NASA's key concern, how that propulsion system will perform during critical phases of flight like undocking and the braking burn on the return to Earth. The small engines need to fire hundreds of times to keep the spacecraft in the precise orientation. Boeing is confident, but within NASA there's disagreement.
They're worried that we don't know for sure, so they estimate the risk higher, and they would recommend that we avoid coming home because we have another option.
That option? The next SpaceX mission to the ISS could launch with a crew of 2 instead of 4, leaving 2 empty seats for Wilmore and Williams to return next February. We asked NASA astronaut Nick Hague about the possibility of giving up his seat.
Ultimately, those are my colleagues up there, and there's nothing I want to see more than for them to come home safely.
Even if it means that your next trip to space gets delayed.
Absolutely.
NASA could make a decision critical to Starliner's future by late next week. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Tonight, NASA has finally revealed how it plans to pull off its newest mission, getting 2 astronauts back to Earth. Their saga began with what was supposed to be an 8-day test flight into orbit aboard Boeing's Starliner capsule. Well, now, instead of 8 days, it will be 8 months. All of it a blow to an American aviation giant now stumbling in space. CBS's Mark Strassman is in Houston tonight and leads us off with the very latest. Mark?
David, this is one of the most consequential safety decisions for NASA in a generation. To bring home these 2 astronauts, the space agency will now look past Boeing Starliner to Boeing's competitor, SpaceX.
NASA has decided that Butch and Suni will return with Crew 9 next February.
NASA's decision switched spaceships and space companies mid-mission.
Ignition.
Back in June, astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams flew to the International Space Station on Boeing Starliner. But now they'll fly home next February in a SpaceX Crew Dragon. Despite Boeing's insistence, Starliner is safe to fly them back.
You know, it's disappointing that they're not coming home on Starliner, but that's okay. It's a test flight.
NASA spent weeks analyzing issues Starliner developed on its flight to the ISS. Specifically, helium leaks and the overheating of small maneuvering thrusters. That propulsion system's critical to the return flight home, including undocking and the braking burn on the return to Earth. The small engines need to fire hundreds of times to keep the spacecraft in the precise orientation for safe re-entry and on-target touchdown. Instead, Starliner will return uncrewed next month.
There was just too much uncertainty in the prediction of the thrusters. It was just too much risk with the crew.
In a statement, Boeing said, "We continue to focus first and foremost on the safety of the crew and spacecraft. We are executing the mission as determined by NASA." But NASA's decision is bound to frustrate the legacy aerospace giant in what the space agency admitted was a dramatic change.
So how now do you begin to rebuild that relationship of trust with Boeing?
Oh, I don't think we're rebuilding trust. I think we're looking at the data, and we view the data and the uncertainty that's there differently than Boeing does.
The 2 astronauts originally were supposed to spend 8 days on the space station. Today is their day 80 in space, and now they have another 6 months more to go. David?
Just have to get them home safely. Mark Strassman, thank you so much.
Breaking news now from space. Boeing's troubled Starliner capsule is heading back to Earth after undocking this evening from the International Space Station. CBS's Mark Strassman joins us now with the latest on this remote-controlled return home. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Nora. Almost 3 months late, Starliner just undocked and is now on its way back to Earth. No one is on board, but a lot is riding on this flight home.
Separation confirmed. Starliner is now backing away from station and starting its return to Earth.
With no astronauts on board, flight controllers in Houston remotely undocked Boeing Starliner from the International Space Station. Left behind, astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. Concerns over Starliner's helium leaks and engine issues have kept them there since June.
You have got this. We have your backs, and you've got this. Bring her back to Earth. Good luck.
NASA decided Starliner will head home without its crew, despite Boeing's confidence in the ship's safety.
We view the data and the uncertainty that's there differently than Boeing does.
Starliner, flying autonomously, must perform the critical braking burn on the return to Earth, then separate from its service module and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere for a touchdown under parachutes.
We just don't know how much we can use the thrusters on the way back home before we encounter a problem.
NASA astronaut Frank Rubio can relate to delayed homecomings. In 2022, his Soyuz capsule sprung a leak. A 6-month mission turned into more than a year.
Have you talked to Suni and Butch about it?
Yes, we have spoken. They're doing great. Certainly, there's a little part of you that's disappointed. You just have to kind of dedicate and rededicate yourself to the mission.
Mark, you're asking the same question everybody is asking. What about those astronauts? How are they doing, and how does NASA plan to get them home?
Nora, they seem to be doing fine. SpaceX, Boeing's rival, is going to, scheduled at least, to bring them home in next February. That's 8 months later than planned. But Nora, Starliner's future is much less certain.
Mark Strassman with those updates. Thank you very much.
Touchdown. Starliner is back on Earth. That landing coming.
And there it is. Boeing Starliner spacecraft returned safely to Earth late last night, touching down in the New Mexico desert. The capsule was empty. Astronauts Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams are still on the International Space Station and will be there for several more months. Our Mark Strassman has the latest.
Separation confirmed. Starliner is now backing away from station and starting its return to Earth.
With no astronauts aboard, flight controllers in Houston remotely undocked Boeing Starliner from the International Space Station. The spacecraft successfully fired its engines for the critical braking burn on the return to Earth, separated from its service module, and re-entered the Earth's atmosphere.
Starliner showing a beautiful streak across the sky.
A seemingly smooth ending to a turbulent mission.
Touchdown. Starliner is back on Earth.
All of us feel happy about the successful landing, but then there's a piece of us, all of us, that we wish it would have been the way we had planned it.
Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams were supposed to be on board, but worries about Starliner's propulsion system led NASA to pull the pair off the return flight. Despite Boeing's insistence, the ship was safe.
This is a tough business that we're in. Human spaceflight is not easy.
Their 8-day mission will now stretch 8 months. SpaceX, Boeing's rival, will taxi them home next February.
Have you talked to Suni and Butch about it, given them any advice?
Yes, we have spoken. They're doing great.
NASA astronaut Frank Rubio can relate to delayed homecomings. In 2022, his Soyuz capsule sprung a leak. A 6-month mission turned into more than a year, an American record.
Certainly, there's a little part of you that's disappointed. It's okay to acknowledge that, but you also can't mope around for the entire time, right? You just have to kind of dedicate and rededicate yourself to the mission.
Starliner's back on Earth, but the program's future is up in the air. Boeing executives were no-shows at a post-landing press conference. In a statement, the company said they're going to review the data before determining the program's next steps. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Ignition, full power, and liftoff.
There goes a new mission to the International Space Station. The Falcon rocket blasting off today from Cape Canaveral, Florida. On board the capsule, 2 crew members and 2 empty seats. The goal to get 2 astronauts back to Earth after a months-long delay. CBS's Manuel Bojorquez is at the Kennedy Space Center with more on the unique mission.
This was a dramatic change for NASA. Typically, the SpaceX Crew Dragon carries 4 passengers into space. This time, it's only carrying 2.
Engine full power and liftoff.
NASA astronaut Nick Hague and a Russian cosmonaut are now in orbit with 2 empty seats. Those seats are needed to bring astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams back to Earth.
This mission is bigger than any one crew. It's bigger than any one person. And so we've got a dynamic challenge ahead of us.
I'd like to extend our congratulations to the entire Crew 9 team.
Wilmore and Williams were part of the first crewed test flight of Boeing's Starliner capsule, and though it got them to the space station back in June, problems with its propulsion system prompted NASA to look for another ride.
This was not the very first option. We wanted to take Starliner to the completion and land it back on land at home. But, you know, you have to turn the page and look at the next opportunity.
But it meant bumping 2 astronauts off this mission, Zena Cardman and Stephanie Wilson.
I would be happy to give up a seat for them. If that is the safest thing, that is what's most important. We need to return them safely.
Even if all goes as planned, Williams and Wilmore will have to spend another 5 months in space. Nancy, that's because this latest mission is not set to return to Earth until next February.
Manny, thank you.
More bad news today for the 2 Boeing Starliner astronauts who've had to stay at the International Space Station a lot longer than expected. CBS's Manuel Bojorquez joins us now. Manny, good to see you. So they're not going to come home until late March at the earliest now?
That's right, Nora. This mission was supposed to go just over a week, but now it's become at least a 10-month stay. The astronauts on board, Butch, Wilmore and Suni Williams, launched on the Starliner on June 5th. They were supposed to return 10 days later, but their flight back to Earth has been repeatedly delayed as NASA was troubleshooting issues like helium leaks and the overheating thrusters on the Boeing Starliner. NASA ultimately decided to return Starliner without its crew and have the astronauts fly home on a SpaceX Dragon in February, but now that has been pushed back.
So, Manny, I have to ask you, what is the problem now?
So here's the thing, their ride back home, it is already on the International Space Station, but the new issue is with a different SpaceX Dragon that is supposed to deliver the astronauts that will replace them. NASA says SpaceX needs more time to get that spacecraft ready for flight, pushing that launch back to late March. NASA does not want Wilmore and Williams to leave until the new crew arrives, so the International Space Station was recently restocked with everything the crew needs, including water, clothing, and oxygen. And Nora, the space agency adds that quote-unquote special items to help celebrate the holidays are also on board.
I hope so. We are thinking of those astronauts. Manny, thank you.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Ready for the event.
Wonderful. It's great to see you, Commander Williams. You just set a record for spacewalks. What was that like to be the woman who has walked more hours in space than any other?
You know, it's all sort of a matter of happenstance. I was really lucky to be in the astronaut corps when we were building this amazing International Space Station and had the opportunity to do a number of construction spacewalks. And then, you know, coming up here this time, it was not the plan, but we were ready. You know, Butch and I prepared and we're fully up, ready to do anything for the ISS. So it was maybe good fortune that we got to do it, and a couple of the spacewalks were some pretty critical things, and we were able to get it done.
For those of us stuck here on Earth who will never walk in space, can you tell us what it's like? Is it ever something that you forget you're out floating in the middle of space while you're doing it?
So yeah, it's a surreal experience. I'll say that, and you know, there's a lot that goes into it. You know, the spacesuits are just amazing. I hug mine every time I come back in because it keeps us alive. It's our own little spacecraft. You know, when you open the hatch and you go outside, of course, how could you not be a little bit nervous? I'm always a little bit nervous, but you know, there's a task at hand that you're going to get on it and get going. So you know, I think you put that little bit nervousness aside and just go out and do what you've trained to do. But then again, you look outside and you see the Earth all of a sudden right outside your visor, and you can't forget where you are, and it's just an amazing experience.
We noticed that on the spacesuit, which you said you hug when you come back in, that it says "Believe." What does that mean for you? There's
a lot to that, right? You know, that sign comes from a TV show, which maybe you know. 1, 2, 3, and that show is like just a lot of good anecdotes about leadership and teamwork, and I think it also, of course, you know, we can get this stuff done, and just gotta believe.
Is gotta believe part of what's gotten you through your extended stay?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, it's a risky business, right? We all know that, and you know, spacecraft, spacesuits, you know, it's a matter of thousands of people getting it right with a lot of equipment, a lot of engineering, a lot of creative ideas to get it done. And, you know, I have faith in our team, and, you know, we are up here for a reason. We believe in the process. We believe in what we're doing. What we're doing is good for humanity. We're doing incredible science up here. I mean, stem cell research, you know, bioprinting, you know, 3D printing. I mean, it's just amazing. So this is just an incredible station, and I think we're doing the right thing.
In terms of your extended stay, I think for people who, you know, might have had a layover in Philly or something, they find it hard to get their head around staying longer. Where did you find the patience, Suni?
You know, those people have the ability to go get a latte, so they shouldn't complain too much.
Are you missing the lattes? And if not a latte, what are you looking forward to when you get back?
My husband makes a good latte, so I'm looking forward to his latte. I'm also looking forward to seeing the rest of my family and my dogs and jumping in the ocean. I think that will be really nice to just be back on Earth and feel Earth that way.
Is that the sunrise out your window that we're seeing?
Oh yeah, right out my left side right here. So yeah, it's beautiful. You know, of course you want to look for your home. You know, I'm from New England, so I see you guys in New York. But also you can just see how our planet is alive, how the clouds are moving. It's just incredible. The ocean is changing. It's just an amazing place to hang out.
And I understand you've been able to talk to your mom pretty regularly. What do you tell her when you're on the phone to her from outer space, which she might not have expected her daughter to be making calls from outer space when you were a toddler?
Yeah, I think she likes it, but I think you know, I think she's waiting for me to get home. I think she would prefer that we were at home together and you know, going on a road trip. So yeah, I try to call her pretty much every day just to check in and see how she's doing and stuff like that. I like hearing about what she's doing. She's up to playing a bunch of bridge games and things like that. So I get the play-by-play, and it's nice to just have a normal conversation with her, because I know every moment I'm up here is not having time with her, but we'll do that when I get home.
We hear that there might be some news about you coming home sooner than expected. What have you heard about that?
So yeah, I think decisions are starting to get made about how you know, the Crew 10 is going to get up here, and then of course that's a handover between the two crews, and then how we're going to come home. You know, there's a possibility we'll come home a little sooner than we had thought about a little while ago. So we'll see how it all works out. You know, there's like I said, a lot of things up in the air, but you know, you got to make a decision.
You'd be happy to come home earlier, though, yes?
You know, I want the right decision to be made, right? So in the best interest of all of us, right? Of Crew 10, of course, and us. So I'm happy either way. You know, 8 days turned into a couple more months than that, a couple more months, whatever, it doesn't really matter. The right decision just has to be made.
Help me understand something. Last week, President Trump said you and Butch Wilmore, who's your Starliner crewmate, had been, this is the president's words, virtually abandoned. Do you feel abandoned up there, Commander?
No, I don't think those words are quite accurate. You know, both Butch and I have lived up here on the space station before. We know what it's about. We know how, you know, how NASA and our commercial partners work together. So, you know, we expected that we would be up here for a little while. And even when the decision was made to return Starliner, we knew that it would be an extended stay, because we're part of a bigger group. You know, we're part of something bigger than ourselves. We're part of the International Space Station, and we have, you know, obligations to our international partners to do science and exploration while we're up here. So yeah, we knew this was going to happen. So no, we don't feel abandoned. We feel like we're part of the team, and that's a huge honor.
So to think of you as being stuck up there or abandoned, does that basically misunderstand the role of an astronaut?
I would say that's absolutely true. You know, I don't think I'm abandoned. I don't think we're stuck up here. We've got food, we've got clothes, we have a ride home in case anything really bad does happen to the International Space Station. We're in a posture that, you know, that we should be, where we have the International Space Station fully manned and doing what the taxpayers wanted to do, is to do world-class science. And so I feel honored, like I said, to be here and a part of the team.
Explain for people, you could have gone, your ride home is attached to you, right? You could have gone home, but it's a part of the mission to stay. Is that right? Help me understand that.
Sure, it could have taken us home, but that leaves only 3 people on the space station from the Soyuz crew, 2 Russians and 1 American. And you know, the space station is big. It's a building, and it, you know, it's the size of a football field, and you know, things happen, so things can go wrong, and you need to be able to fix it, either inside and outside. And so having additional people to be able to do that capability is really important. And it's, you know, part of our obligations to our international partners to keep this International Space Station vibrant, going, and doing research, world-class research. I think Butch and I did over 500 hours of science experiments while we've been up here, and also do research on ourselves as long-duration crew members up here. So it's all additive and beneficial. So our families understand that too. You know, they signed up with this just like we did. So I think it's all for the good.
In modern space exploration, is the kind of adaptation that you've had to learn crucial if we're going to be going to Mars or any of those long-haul activities. Won't the astronauts of the future need adaptability and the ability to basically have the patience you've demonstrated?
You know, it is part of the game. You know, a lot of our, fellow compadres in the military have to do the same thing when deployments get extended. And you just have to, go with the flow, look at the bright side of it, and, think of how you're contributing. And I think that's an overwhelming feeling of, pride that we could serve our country this way.
Suni, the window is about to close on us, but so as a last question, what is the coolest thing, the thing that made your skin tingle that you just thought, wow, in the time that you've been up there?
We have had some of the most amazing aurora while we've been up here. We've flown through it. So the window around you was like all full of green all around us. And that is pretty spectacular. And to understand that there's things in the universe that are so much more powerful than we can even imagine on Earth, I think that's what blows my mind. And it reminds me that, we're lucky to be here.
Commander Suni Williams, thank you so much. It's been an honor talking to you.
Thank you, John. Have a great night.
We begin tonight moments away from the SpaceX rocket launch that will carry 4 astronauts to the International Space Station, 250 miles away from Earth. This is a live picture from the Kennedy Space Center. It's a mission calculated down to the second and will ultimately bring Butch, Wilmore, and Suni Williams home. CBS's Mark Strassman is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida to cover it all.
Hey, John, we're heading toward the final minute of the countdown now. This second attempt to launch this crew of 4 astronauts led by NASA's Commander Ann McClain, and everything does look like a go for launch. 2 Americans, a Japanese, and a Russian are on board. They are heading to space as part of a regular rotation of astronauts aboard the International Space Station. Generally speaking, these missions last about 6 months or so. This mission is scheduled to be shorter, maybe 4 months, but it could of course be longer, as we've learned with the saga of Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. I mean, they have received so much attention since last June. Remember, they were supposed to go up for 8 days. They ended up staying for 9 months. But right now, everyone's attention is on Launch Pad 39A and the 4 astronauts that are strapped inside the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule on top of the Falcon 9 rocket. As I'm looking around here, there are photographers and NASA employees staring at the launch pad, and they really, really are hoping that we're a go for launch. Let's listen now to Mission Control count down the crew to liftoff.
T-minus 15. T-minus 10. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff. Go SpaceX, go NASA Crew 10. Copy, 1 Alpha.
And liftoff at Crew 10, now
Vehicles pitching downrange.
Space Station. 1.7 million pounds of thrust, now propelling Falcon 9 and Crew 10. We're continuing to get good call-outs on the first stage performance so far. We're now 40 seconds into today's flight. Power and telemetry nominal. Continuing to get good performance call-outs.
Wow. Every moment we watch one of these launches is a thrill. Everything really looks picture perfect. Every one of these crewed missions matters equally to NASA. There are lives on the line, after all. But this one, again, has generated so much of attention because of Wilmore and Williams up on the space station. This crew now flying to meet them will replace them, and after a handover lasting a couple of days, Wilmore and Williams will begin their flight home after a space saga that has lasted more than 9 months. John?
Mark Strassman, what a moment. It is a marvel of human ingenuity. It is fantastic. And Mark, it was great to have your report. Thank you.
And splashdown, Crew 9 back on Earth. They're back
after the longest flight delay in history.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening. I'm Maurice Dubois.
I'm John Dickerson.
Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams returned to Earth this evening, back from what was supposed to be an 8-day mission aboard the International Space Station.
It lasted 35 times longer, a total of 286 days. Wilmore and Williams were launched to the space station aboard a Boeing Starliner capsule last June. But it developed mechanical problems and was brought home without them.
Early this morning, they boarded a SpaceX capsule along with astronaut Nick Hague and Russian cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov for the trip back to Earth. And Mark Strassman reports they arrived home safely.
Homecomings happen differently for astronauts.
We have visual on 4 healthy mains.
You're watching the SpaceX Crew Dragon's main parachutes open 6,500 feet above Earth. Heat shield first, its descent slowed to 15 miles an hour. The capsule with its crew of 4 inside splashed gently into the Gulf. SpaceX's message?
On behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
A welcome back, finally, to Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams.
Ignition.
Wilmore and Williams blasted off back in June. Their space taxi to the ISS, a Boeing Starliner, developed propulsion problems on its first human flight. Their scheduled 8-day mission became a 9-month saga.
So I'm going to lead you down through the PMA.
That protracted stay, orbiting 260 miles above the rest of us, turned political. President Trump claimed they had been virtually abandoned in space by the Biden administration, a claim Williams denied to John Dickerson last month.
You know, I don't think I'm abandoned. I don't think we're stuck up here. We've got food, we've got clothes. We have a ride home in case anything really bad does happen to the International Space Station.
Dragon Freedom being lifted out of the water. And
back in the Gulf, it's one more step toward a Houston homecoming, at last.
And Mark Strassman joins us in Houston at the Johnson Space Center. Mark, so what's next?
John, a NASA jet is going to bring them here to Houston. They'll land at Ellington Field, which is about 10 miles from where I'm standing. And waiting for them for the last 9 months will be their families.
Mark, what about the physical recovery? What is that going to look like?
It varies, John. Making that adjustment from months of microgravity to the pull of gravity, it varies person to person. I talked to one astronaut today. He said that it took him a week to feel 80% and 6 weeks to feel 100%, and he only spent 6 months in space, not 9 months, like Wilmore and Williams.
After a 9-month extended stay aboard the International Space Station, today we got the highly anticipated homecoming splashdown for Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore. Dr. Tom Marshburn, chief astronaut for Sierra Space, knows firsthand the transition from weightlessness to the drag of gravity, having done 3 tours aboard the space station, and joins us now for tonight's interview. So, Doctor, let's start with the physical.
Yeah.
What are they going through now, and what will they go through?
So they're enjoying right now lying down in the gurneys. They're in the med bay of the boat. They're getting close, though, to being loaded on board a helicopter and then taken on board. So a lot of activities, very noisy, a lot of sensations coming in, the sea air, all that stuff. But that whole gravity thing, yeah, they're kind of laughing about it and enjoying experiencing what it feels like to feel the gravity again.
When you first splashed down, is there because of the rush of sensations, is there something that just pierced through and is a really strong memory for you, either the sea air or the sound of the seagulls, or?
All of that in the background. The main thing is, what is this force that is just sucking me into my seat? I mentioned before that we tried to pick up a little half-liter bottle of water and it just slipped through our fingers and fell in our lap. And actually, the commander, Rajachari, radioed to mission control at Hawthorne for SpaceX and said, could you please provide water that's not quite as heavy next time? But it's just a matter of your body just has to get used to the habit of handling things that have weight.
And how long did it take you, and were there stages before you felt what we would associate just with normal.
Right, so very much stages. I would say in about a day, you start to get used to, your body remembers gravity. You might be a little unsteady. Your sense of balance, that's got to get right as well. You think you're really good after a couple of days. They won't let you drive for a couple of weeks. They put you through a lot of balance tests. The thing that takes the longest is these are all athletes in some way. And so they're not back into shape like they were before until probably about 3 months.
What about the mental adjustment?
Yeah, great question. You could ask the families of those that come back. My wife will tell you I was permanently changed, but probably 6 months before you just stop taking out the trash and looking up to the night sky and going, was I really there? Did that really happen? So you get those kinds of thoughts, and some remain with you for the rest of your life.
So, because you can actually see the ISS from...
You can. There's an app for that. It'll tell you when it shows up. And so not every night. It has to be in just the right place at the right time. But absolutely, it's the second brightest thing, second to the moon in the night sky.
We talked about this a tiny bit on the special report, but, you know, Butch and Suni, I call them that just because we talked about them so much.
What they go by.
They, you know, it's been characterized in a bunch of different ways. As someone who knows them and who knows the sense of mission, what does it feel like when you have an extended stay? How does an astronaut process the idea, well, you got to stay a little bit longer than you expected?
I think there'd be dual emotions. The overwhelming one is, as you said, this is the mission, I'm going to do it. Even a sense of pride, if you will, of saying, they trust me to do this. And so absolutely going to carry it out. And some, in their case, some joy in knowing that all those years of training, they're going to get to do it all. Maybe even get a spacewalk, which they did. They get to do all the science on board the space station, experience zero-G. The other side is, of course, working out what you might be missing with the family and knowing the family didn't expect this and it's hard on them.
How is space changing in terms of Sierra Space and SpaceX and Boeing and all these private industries being a part of space? How should we think of the entire space exploration idea now?
So it's changing over to the commercial world for low Earth orbit, certainly. At Sierra Space, we're building habitats. We got our Dream Chaser launching this year that's going to bring in cargo to the ISS. And so there are several companies that want to get involved in human spaceflight, long duration spaceflight. And so we're all going to be probably doing that together in low Earth orbit. NASA bringing crew members back to the moon, explore the moon, live around the moon, and eventually on to Mars. So all those things, NASA's kind of leaving over low Earth orbit to those of us who want to build an infrastructure in low Earth orbit.
Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams told USA Today told us today they're glad to be back on Earth. Millions of people followed how their 8-day mission to the International Space Station became a 9-month space saga. Now they're home in Houston and talking to our Mark Strassman, who joins us now live. So, Mark, what'd they tell you?
John, I got to say, I think what is so relatable about these astronauts is how well they responded when life threw them a curveball, right? They looked great, and they told me today they feel great. Best part about being back?
Family. Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Family first, but just being thankful, and so I feel very humbled by all the love and attention that we've got.
Surprising?
Yeah, very surprising. Like, wow. But what's really great about that is people are paying attention to human spaceflight and what it takes and how hard it is.
Butch and Suni, you said all along that you never felt abandoned or stranded on the station. Now that you're back, are you surprised by how political the mission became?
Surprised?
It is.
It's somewhat surprising, yes, but honestly, all that political, that's not where we live. That's not where we exist and what we do.
You know, I'm not surprised, honestly, that there was a little discourse over all of this. That's okay. But, you know, the better thing about it is both sides, or everybody, is looking at human exploration and understanding that it's a tough thing, but it's something that we all want to do. It's in our heart, and we will continue it as a country. We'll continue it as a species.
You went up with 2 empty seats and came back with 2 astronauts who were suddenly famous. Did you give them a hard time about that?
Every day.
So, Mark, the astronauts are meeting with Boeing to talk about the difficulty with that spacecraft. Is there any more information on what went wrong?
Yeah, John, for the 9 months that Williams and Wilmore were up in space back on Earth, NASA and Boeing were working on those mechanical issues with the propulsion system. NASA says they're about 70% of the way home. The remaining 30%, which must be the thorniest part of the unresolved issues, they say they're working on that all summer. But the non-mechanical issue, John, is that space is a business that runs on absolute trust, right? You have to have that up and down the line. Butch Wilmore told me today, when it comes to trust, there are definitely unresolved concerns in that relationship.